In a remote cabin, a silent girl and a stray dog find each other. Hazel is grieving. Shadow is broken. But when a fire threatens everything, he does the unthinkable, saves her life. Their bond becomes legend. Shadow is the heartwarming true story of healing bravery, and the dog who proved that love doesn't need words. Sometimes, the ones we rescue us right back. The afternoon sun hung low over the Texas plains, casting long ember streaks across the porch where 8-year-old Hazel Martin sat quietly in her wheelchair, eyes fixed on a point far beyond the dusty fields. Her small fingers traced circles along the armrest, a rhythm she'd adopted since the accident. Inside the cabin, her father, Ethan Martin, moved about in practiced silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every soft thud of a cabinet door, was calibrated to avoid breaking the fragile stillness that had settled over their home like dust. Ethan, a retired Army sergeant with the posture of a man still on duty, watched his daughter from the window. His face bore the quiet wear of someone who had survived explosions, deployments, and more funerals than he cared to count. But nothing had shattered him like seeing his little girl stop smiling. Since the crash that took her legs and her mother, Hazel had folded into herself. She spoke rarely, laughed never. Doctors called it trauma. Ethan called it heartbreak. He had moved them here to this secluded stretch of land in southern Texas, hoping the quiet would be healing. Days passed with routine precision books, physical therapy, warm soup, the occasional tune from an old radio, but nothing could reach her. And now, as the sun dipped and shadows crept along the grass, Ethan stood at the doorway, unsure what hurt more, the silence around them or the silence between them. Then, from deep within the trees, a sound broke through, faint, desperate, a cry. At first Ethan thought he imagined a faint broken sound caught between the rustling leaves and the chirp of cicadas. But then it came again, sharper this time, a whimper, a rasp, something in pain. Hazel turned her head slightly, the smallest flicker of attention crossing her face. Ethan stepped off the porch, his boots crunching the dry grass. "Stay here, sweetheart," he said gently, though he knew she wouldn't respond. He grabbed his walking stick from beside the door and began moving toward the tree line, each step slow but deliberate. The sound led him deeper into the woods, past brush and bramble, until he found the source. Beneath a thick oak tree, what he saw made his chest tighten. A German shepherd, emaciated and shaking, lay collapsed in the dirt. Its fur was caked in dried blood and filth, and a rusted chain choked its neck, padlocked to a metal stake driven cruelly into the ground. One of its paws was raw, scraped down to the skin. The dog lifted its head weakly as Ethan approached, eyes dull but alive barely. "Jesus," Ethan whispered, crouching as far as his knees would allow. "What the hell happened to you, boy?" He reached for the chain, but it was too tight, too thick. He cursed under his breath and backed away, promising softly, "Hang on." Minutes later, he returned with his hunting knife and a length of old towel. With hands trembling not from fear but fury, he sawed at the rusted metal. Inch by inch, the chain gave way. Finally, with a sharp snap, the lock broke free. The dog didn't run. It simply collapsed into the dirt, a soft, breathy whimper escaping its chest. Ethan wrapped the towel gently around its body, then turned toward the house. From the porch, Hazel was watching, eyes wide. For the first time in months, something flickered behind them, curiosity, or maybe hope. Back at the cabin, Ethan laid the injured shepherd on a folded blanket near the fireplace. He cleaned what he could, warm water, iodine, and gentle hands. But he didn't touch the chain wound. That would take time. Hazel sat nearby, silent, her wide eyes never leaving the dog. "He's safe now," Ethan murmured as he covered the dog with another towel. "But we'll need to let him come to us, not the other way around." Hazel gave a tiny nod. The next few days were delicate. Shadow, that's what Hazel decided to call him, barely moved. He curled himself tightly in the corner, every muscle taut, flinching at sudden sounds, refusing food, even water. When Hazel tried to wheel closer, he pressed himself against the wall, eyes full of fear. It stung, but she didn't give up. Instead, she and Ethan started placing warm chicken broth in a shallow dish a few feet away from him. They didn't watch or speak, just sat quietly nearby, letting the silence do the talking. At night, Hazel would whisper softly to the shadows, telling stories about her mom, about her school, about how quiet everything had become. Her voice was small, shaky, but honest. And Shadow listened. Ethan noticed the dog's ears twitch whenever Hazel spoke. One afternoon, he caught Shadow taking a slow, cautious sip from the dish. "Progress," he whispered to his daughter. Hazel didn't answer, but a tiny corner of her mouth curled just a little. She didn't need to say it out loud. They both knew this wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about saving what was left of them, too. It happened slowly, almost invisibly. Shadow began eating a little more each day. The first time he took a full bite in front of Hazel, she didn't cheer or clap, just watched, quiet and still, as if afraid to break the moment. He still wouldn't let her touch him, but he no longer flinched when she came close. And whenever she spoke, his ears twitched toward her like her voice was something his bones remembered. One early morning before the sun had fully risen, Ethan found Hazel asleep in her wheelchair beside the hearth. Her blanket had slipped off. Shadow lay curled at her feet, not touching but close watching her, protecting her. By the end of the week, Hazel woke up to find Shadow resting beside her chair, his head nestled just inches from her hand. She blinked, unsure if she was dreaming, but when she reached out slowly, fingers trembling, he didn't move. He simply looked up at her with calm, steady eyes. It wasn't much, but it was everything. That afternoon, Ethan attached a small silver bell to the side of Hazel's left wheel. "So he'll always know where you are," he said with a soft smile. From that day forward, the soft jingle of the bell became part of the house's heartbeat. Wherever Hazel rolled, Shadow followed. He didn't crowd her or beg for attention. He just stayed near, quiet and loyal, like he understood that healing wasn't loud, it was patient. Hazel began to talk more, not much, but enough. She told Shadow about her favorite ice cream, about the book her mom used to read at bedtime, and about the stars she could see from the window at night. And though Shadow never made a sound, his presence spoke volumes. They were two beings who had been broken, and now, step by step, they were learning how to stand again together. The wind had picked up after midnight, brushing through the trees like whispers. Inside the cabin, the fire had died to a warm glow. Hazel slept lightly in her bed near the hearth, one hand resting on Shadow's fur. Then a sound, a faint, muffled gasp. "Something's not right?" Hazel opened her eyes, blinking into the dark. The house was quiet. She sat up, listening. Then came another sound, like a groan, short and strained, from the back bedroom. "Daddy." No answer. Panic rose in her chest. She wheeled herself toward the hallway, calling again, louder this time, but still nothing. Reaching the door, she pushed it open. What she saw. Ethan was lying in bed, pale, sweat glistening on his forehead, his hands clutching the blanket. His face was twisted in pain, jaw clenched. He looked scared. "Daddy," she cried out, her voice cracking. His eyes fluttered open. "Hazel." The medicine kitchen shelf. Hazel turned and rushed, her wheels squeaking against the floor. She reached the cabinet, looked up and froze. The bottle was way too high. She stood slightly in her chair, fingers stretching, but it was no use. Her chest tightened. Tears burned her eyes. I can't reach it." Shadow, who had followed silently, perked up. Without hesitation, he trotted forward, leapt halfway onto the counter, nudged the bottle until it fell, and then carefully picked it up with his mouth. Hazel stared, stunned. "Shadow." She grabbed the bottle, raced back to her dad, opened it with trembling hands, poured water, and gently helped him drink. Moments passed. Ethan's breathing began to calm. His body relaxed. Hazel's tears finally fell, not from fear now, but relief. "You're okay, right?" she asked. Ethan nodded slowly, voice soft. "Thanks to you." Hazel looked at Shadow, who had settled beside the bed, tail thumping once. She smiled through her tears, reaching out to pet him. "We did it, boy, we saved him." And in that quiet room, filled with fear just minutes before, something brighter took root: hope. After that night, everything changed. Hazel didn't say much about what happened. She didn't need to. The way she moved the next morning, just a little quicker, her eyes a little brighter, told Ethan everything he needed to know. Shadow never left her side. Wherever her wheelchair rolled, the soft jingle of the bell on her wheel echoed through the cabin, and Shadow followed without question. He walked beside her during their slow circles around the porch, sat close when she read books aloud, and nudged her gently when she seemed too quiet for too long. One afternoon, as Ethan watched from the kitchen, Hazel dropped her crayon under the table. Without a word, Shadow stepped forward, picked it up carefully in his mouth, and placed it in her lap. She looked at him, smiled softly, and whispered, "Thank you." That same week, Ethan showed her how to give Shadow simple commands with hand signals. "Try this," he said, demonstrating a slow lift of his fingers. Shadow responded instantly, sitting up straight, alert. Hazel actually giggled for the first time in what felt like forever. By the end of the month, Shadow had learned how to bring Hazel's water bottle, retrieve her slippers, and even push the door closed with his nose. At night, he'd rest near her bed, head tilted as if guarding her dreams. Ethan often stood in the doorway just watching them, his daughter and the dog they rescued healing each other in ways he never could have planned for. For so long, this cabin had been filled with silence. Now it was filled with motion, with meaning, with life. And for the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to believe they were becoming a family again. It was late October when the fire came. That evening, Ethan had gone out to check the traps he'd set deep in the woods. He told Hazel he wouldn't be long, just a couple of hours, and she nodded from her spot near the fire. Shadow curled beside her, like always. The night had settled in gently, wind whispering through the trees, stars peeking through a thin veil of clouds. Hazel had fallen asleep near the fireplace, a book still resting open in her lap, her head tilted gently to the side. Shadow lay curled nearby, his back warm against the rug, ears twitching at every distant sound. Outside, the wind had stilled. The woods were calm. The only movement came from within the cabin. Behind the bookcase, a faulty wire sparked. Once, twice, then with a soft hiss, it caught flame. Smoke rose slowly, at first curling up the wooden wall. The crackle of dry heat was subtle, nearly masked by the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. But Shadow smelled it. His nose lifted. He sniffed again, then bolted upright. The air had changed, acrid. Wrong. He barked once, sharp and loud. Hazel didn't stir. The flames had begun to climb now, licking up the paneling. Smoke drifted low, sneaking across the room. Shadow barked again, louder this time, rushing to Hazel and pawing at her shoulder. Still no response. He ran to the window, yanked the curtain down with his teeth as it began to smolder, then turned back and barked directly into Hazel's face, pawing at her arm again, harder this time. Hazel jerked awake, coughing. Her eyes widened in confusion, then fear. What? Shadow darted to the hallway. Flames were visible now just beyond the living room, creeping fast. Hazel reached for her wheels, but the heat pressed down like a weight. She choked on the thickening air, hands trembling. Shadow returned, circled her chair, and pushed against it with his shoulder. Shadow, she coughed again, too overwhelmed to speak. The shepherd lunged to the back door and slammed his body against the emergency bar Ethan had installed months before. The door burst open, a gust of cool night air rushing in. Shadow raced back, pressed himself against Hazel's chair, pushing with all his weight as she gripped the wheels weakly, fighting to move. Inch by inch, they made it through the smoke and into the night. Gasping, shaking, Hazel looked back at the glowing cabin, then down at Shadow, his fur singed but his eyes steady. "You saved me," she whispered, tears mixing with ash. And Shadow, panting and watchful, leaned into her side as if to say, "I always will." By the time Ethan returned, the fire had already been put out. He saw the flashing lights from the road and volunteer firefighters moving through the smoldering remains of the back room. Panic clutched his chest as he jumped from the truck, heart pounding louder than the wind. "Hazel," he shouted, running toward the cabin. Then he saw her, wrapped in a blanket, soot on her cheeks, sitting in her wheelchair beneath the oak tree. Shadow was beside her, tail still, eyes alert. "Dad," Hazel whispered, her voice raspy. Ethan dropped to his knees in front of her, cupping her face, checking for burns, for bruises, anything. "I'm okay," she said. "Shadow, he got me out." The firefighter nearby nodded. If it wasn't for that dog, she wouldn't have made it out in time. Ethan looked at Shadow. The shepherd's coat was singed in spots, his sides heaving, but he sat tall, eyes never leaving Hazel. Ethan's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a choked breath, then in a voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for saving my little girl." Days later, The story made its way to a local blog. Photos of Shadow beside Hazel, of the damaged cabin, and of a singed curtain in the dirt spread faster than Ethan could have imagined. Comments poured in. Then the email came. A national organization wanted to train Shadow to be a full-time service dog for veterans. He has the instincts, they wrote, and the heart. With the right training, he could help hundreds. Ethan read the message 3 times. He knew what it meant. It was a chance for Shadow to do more, to be more. He asked Hazel what she thought. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at Shadow, who sat quietly at her side, his head gently resting against her wheel. And that night, as they sat under the stars, Ethan whispered, "You don't have to go, buddy. I think you've already found your mission." Shadow didn't move. He didn't need to. He was already home. Weeks passed. The cabin slowly healed. Fresh wood replaced what the fire had taken. But what mattered most had already been restored. Hazel laughed more now. She read out loud again and sang softly while Shadow lay curled beside her chair. Ethan often watched them from the porch, coffee in hand, heart full in a way it hadn't been for years. The blog Ethan started Pause and Purpose gained a quiet following. He didn't write for fame. He wrote to remember. To remind others that sometimes the ones we save are the ones who save us. And on one golden afternoon, Hazel leaned down, kissed the top of Shadow's head, and whispered, "You're my best friend." Shadow didn't move. He didn't have to. The world had tried to forget them all, but love, loyalty, and a little fur-covered miracle had brought them back together. They remembered how to live again.